there, Banditos. Welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have a spectacular guest for you. His name is Mike Allred, and Mike is the creator of Madman, that iconic character, costume, logo that you know so well. But also, he has been working more recently with the big two at Marvel, with X-Force, X-Statix, Excellence, that celebrity mutant superhero team that keeps morphing into different books. Started out with Peter Milligan, and of course, Doop was part of that. Everybody loves Doop. And also Silver Surfer with Dan Slott, and FF with Matt Fraction. And more recently, he is with DC doing things like Superman Space Age and Batman Dark Age on the Black Label imprint. But we are here to really talk about the Marvel art of Mike Allred, which is kickstarting right now. There are a few days left to get in on it. It's a spectacular series of books from Clover Press. And Mike's is just going to be amazing. We know it. So check that out in the show notes. But without further ado, this is Mike Allred. Mike Allred to the program. Mike, how are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're going to kick you off with the first question we ask all the guests, and that is, how did you first discover comic books?
Um, I've related this. This is my origin story, so I guess it just has to be told. My earliest clear memory in my life is waking up in a hospital bed and blanketed with comic books. Turns out my older brother Lee, who I wouldn't know what a comic book is or have the taste that I have if it wasn't for him, but he knocked me off a card table and I landed on my head and got a concussion, and they had to take me to the hospital. And so Lee got mom and dad to buy a bunch of comics in the gift shop. And so when I became conscious, just the entire bed was just covered with comic books.
You would be actually surprised how many origin stories start with a hospital visit.
Really?
I must say, you are not the first, and I imagine you're
Wow.
not the last. Yeah. A lot of kids, for whatever reason, they're in the hospital, and that is the sort of saving grace is a
Hmm.
pile or even one comic book. So amazing.
Our piano teacher and our guitar teacher had waiting rooms, and they had comic books too. So it's kind of sad for, to think that nowadays they're just not everywhere like they were in my childhood,
Yeah.
because they were everywhere. Any friend, you'd go to a friend's house, make a new friend, they had comic books there, and you always look to see what they had. You'd go on a family trip and visit relatives. They had comic books. Um, it's become such a specialized thing. I'm thrilled and very fortunate and grateful that enough people still read comic books that I make a decent living. But man, they were everywhere in my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. The spinner racks at the supermarket, 7-Eleven, all that has fortunately gone away. I mean,
Yeah.
the entire kind of category, if you want to lump them in with magazines and periodicals, I mean, everything is basically gone away, which is very
Yeah.
sad in terms of the physical media. But at least for
Well,
comics, there's a specialty, arena.
the bright side of that change is the existence of comic book stores. So while I may mourn the loss of the access and the commonness of a comic book from my youth, to be able to go to a comic book store and find virtually anything is a blessing.
Yes.
In childhood, if you missed that issue, if somebody snagged it off the spinner rack before you, or if you didn't think to keep up with what you were collecting, you'd have holes in your collection. So the first comic book store I ever found was Emerald City Comics, and it was the first comic book store in Oregon. I live in Eugene, and so the first comic book store in Oregon was in Eugene. And when I discovered that, it was like, you had your friends. This friend had the best stack of comics. You know what I mean? Going into that comic book shop was like, ah, just heaven on earth.
When did you make the connection that there were people behind the comics? Because sometimes it's not immediately that you understand that there are people creating this and that this can be an actual profession. Did you get that right off the bat?
Again, my older brother, I owe him everything because he's literally a genius and had the most wonderful taste. I would always buy kind of the silly kitty comics. And then when we got home and I'd blown through mine, he had the richer stuff, like, and I quickly learned, oh, I like this because Jack Kirby did it. Oh, I like this because John Romita did it. I like this because Alex Toth did it. And so I realized that there were these, and of course, if you're reading Marvel Comics, it's Stan Lee, Stan Lee, Stan the Man Lee, Stan the Man Lee. So you're constantly seeing the names. And I learned how to read from comic books. So, because I wanted to know what these things, what was being said in these exciting events. And so I excelled in elementary school because I was well read. But yeah, you DC came much later in giving the creators credit in the way that Marvel did. That was the genius of Stan, if nothing else, that he made celebrities out of the creators. You even knew, hey, Joe Rosen lettered this, or Marie Severin colored this. It's like Joe Sinnott is the letterer or the inker on this. So you'd see Jack Kirby's art looks like this because Joe Sinnott inked it, and Jack Kirby's art looks like this because Dick Ayers inked it, or Chick Stone inked it. And you start differentiating these things, and it was kind of fun to put those pieces together. But never, ever, ever did I think I could make that could be a career path. Because for me, like especially with Marvel, because you got so much behind the scenes stuff with Marvel, and there was the bullpen. So in my mind, everyone worked in the same place. And I didn't realize they would come and drop their work off and stuff, but you just imagine that there were just lines and lines of drafting tables. And so you had to live there and somehow you had to get into that room. And because of that, I never seriously, even though Lee and I always drew our own comics, our parents always made sure we had art supplies. We always had different craft projects going on in the house. So it was a very artistic house. But never did I think, oh, I want to do that for a living. I didn't think it was possible. Or just the same way I didn't think, I could like I realized the Beatles were successful because of John, Paul, George, and Ringo, not because they went and applied somewhere or they went to a college and got a degree. So comic book artists were celebrities in the same way that rock stars were celebrities or movie stars were celebrities. So it always seemed accessible in that way, not. You can't go to school for it. And so yeah, I never really I stumbled into it in the most wonderful way, but not because I planned it that way.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that because I read it was sort of a circuitous path to comics. Like you did go to college and you started out studying art, but then switched to broadcasting and then had a
Correct.
little bit of a broadcasting career before you broke into comics, right?
Yeah. Well, broadcasting was because one summer uh, between school years in college, I worked at the local radio station. The kid across the street, his dad owned the AMN FM radio stations in Roseburg, Oregon, which is about an hour south of where I live now. And Eric, who, my best bud who lived across the street, was like, "Hey, come work at you have a nice voice. Come work at the radio station." And so kind of learned a lot from him. And then going back to school thinking, I have no idea how to make a career in art. And the teachers teaching, wonderful teachers, they didn't say, hey, here's how you make a living. And I didn't necessarily want to be a teacher, but that seemed like the only realistic avenue to, you know, do art. And also, by it, the assignments very early made it clear to me I didn't want to be a commercial artist because I wanted to create what I want to create. I didn't want, to take this job selling irons or tires or
Right.
and so a career in commercial art, like I would have loved to make a living making record album covers, but other than Roger Dean with Yes, I mean, you don't really see somebody having a stable career as making record album covers. But anyway, yeah, so. But because of that, I thought, well, I know I can get a job in broadcasting, so I switched my major to broadcasting, and then from radio went to television. And long story short, ended up being a TV reporter in Europe. And when my hobby started making money, my comic book hobby, I, thanks to Laura, had the courage to just cut ties and leave Europe and start a professional comic book career. So as of January 1990, I've been doing comics full time. And my last story as a TV reporter was covering the fall of the Berlin Wall and interviewing East German refugees and just being right there, feeling the pulse of the most optimistic time in my life, as far as feeling like the world had this great hope going forward. I've felt I'm a very optimistic person in general, but I've never felt that kind of joy before. And because the contrast was, I was sent all over Europe covering stories, and a lot of them were human interest stories. So there'd always be somebody who was excited about their hobby, or they were building a youth center, or that sort of thing. And the hard news was few, because we would plan these stories that I would be sent around on. It was rarely a hard news story, but living in Europe, never really, we had some good friends, but never got a sense in general that there was hope, or that there was any kind of like, it didn't feel like when you're in the States, you kind of have this rah, freedom. This kind of, you get a sense of patriotism and appreciation for what's available to you. And yeah, you didn't get it so much over there. You didn't get that feeling of, oh, well, and not to say that they don't have the same rights. I feel like in some ways they have advantages over us in
Mhm.
healthcare, for instance. But when the wall came down, it's a total stranger. Well, the best example I have of this was New Year's Eve, 89 going into 90. And we were on the mountain of Landstuhl Castle, looking over the village of Landstuhl. And fireworks were legal. And so from all around us, from the castle, all these fireworks were just jetting off. And down below, every street corner you could see fireworks just jetting off, and people laughing and dancing and just thrilled. And the people around us hugging, everybody hugging each other, total strangers hugging each other. And that was the feeling that was happening since the wall came down, and just culminated in that. It was just this, that's where it all, because of course we then left soon after that. But it was just this feeling like the whole world had come together. Of course we were there, and so we were feeling something very different from how I'm sure China wasn't feeling it.
Right.
But for us then, it just felt like this exciting new world where anything was possible. And for me, that's what was happening. I had a 12 issue contract for something called Jaguar Stories thanks to Steve Siegel, who very successful writer, went on to co-create Ben 10 and Big Hero 6. And he's done tons and tons of awesome comic books. But I had met him in Colorado Springs, where I had been teaching television production at the Air Force Academy at the exact same job his father had had years before. So he was the first comics pro I ever met. The second comics pro I ever met was Will Eisner in Frankfurt, in Frankfurt, Germany. He
Hmm.
was over there promoting Comic Book Confidential, this really awesome documentary in comics. I highly recommend people seek it out if they haven't seen it already. But and then we learned about comic book conventions, having come back to the States, and would constantly run into Will Eisner, and he was always there watching my progress and always supportive and wonderful. But yeah, we came back to the States thinking that everything was just going to be amazing, and it was, but we had some really scary moments because Kamiko, the company that was going to publish Jaguar stories for Steve and I, the reason I was getting this amazing page rate was because they were building assets for Chapter 11 in bankruptcy. And so the new owner very cynically just kind of rounded things up and trapped a lot of people in this catch 22, this limbo. Matt Wagner got caught in that because Kamiko had Grendel and Mage.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, Matt had wrote me while I was still living in Germany. He was living in San Jose, and the first thing of mine that was going to be published was my graphic novel Dead Air. And Dan Vado, the publisher of Slave Labor Graphics, had a comic shop in San Jose, and that's where Matt was buying his comics. Dan got him excited about my stuff, so Matt sent me a Mage postcard and gave me his phone number. So I called him up and we talked and just stayed in touch. And then he ended up moving to Oregon because his sister-in-law, Diana Schutz, and her husband at the time, Bob Schreck, left Kamiko to
Yep.
work for Dark Horse.
Right.
So, so this very tiny little world was being presented to me, and not realizing how lucky I was that my home state was becoming this epicenter for creator-owned comics, and has even grown since then. So even more publishers are near us, and um, but when Matt brought his family there, and anyway, it's just he just became one of our dearest friends, and as well as Bob Schreck and Diana, um, and then of course Mike Richardson at Dark Horse Comics, and so that in a nutshell just would very quickly explain how lucky I was to be where I was under the circumstances that I was under. Because being a comrade, Matt was always promoting my indie stuff when Jaguar Stories didn't come out. Never, and Steve and I tease about, maybe we'll bring it, maybe we'll finish it somehow, someday, somewhere with somebody. But I had to scramble when those checks stopped coming. I had to scramble, and that's why my original successes were. Even then I didn't know how to get work at Marvel or DC. I was really clueless about things. These other things just kind of fell in my lap because somebody would, like Steve would say, "Hey," like he started with Renegade Press. His first book was a series called Kafka. And then it was Kamiko who did a second series, The Amazon, which Tim Sale um, illustrated. And then when when the Wagners moved to Oregon, Tim Sale, who had done some Grendel stuff with Matt, came for their big housewarming visit. So I got to meet Tim Sale early on, and so because of this community that just kind of echoed out, because everybody knows Bob and Diana, and of course everybody knows who Matt is. But Matt would then, knowing that I was struggling in the same way he was, because he did like Terminator, and he did Batman Grendel, huge successes like that. But he's also been very generous. If you look at Grendel, all of the different artists that he's collaborated with on Grendel, one of whom, Bernie Moreau, became one of my very best friends in the business and collaborated with him and got my first gig with Marvel Epic, their Critter online, with a one shot called The Everyman. So I wrote and drew that, and Bernie inked it, and then he painted it on animation cells. So where you would paint, you'd print the black and white art, and then you'd paint on the reverse side, starting with your highlights and working backwards, and it looks wonderful. It's in the Madman-iverse collection. But Bernie's The Jam was a huge, 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 huge inspiration for me. And then my first San Diego Comic Con, Bernie tabled with us. And so if it wasn't for Matt, I wouldn't have hooked up with Bernie and had all of those exchanges, but still just learning and learning and learning how things worked. But Matt was always like, you know, um, showing he's always been generous that way, the way he lifts other people up. And so I've aspired to do the same thing. But it was Matt who turned Neil Gaiman onto my work, and which led to me doing Sandman. So I've just very quickly just tried to lay out. Um, I'm getting better at telling all this faster, but
Well,
it's all of that that made my career possible, because it could have just ended when those Kamiko checks stopped. It was either look for a job in broadcasting again or continue on. And Laura was managing a jewelry store at this time, and she became the breadwinner until I really got my wheels spinning, again, and got those rockets firing. So all of those things led to me never having to get a real job ever again. So yeah, January 1990 was the beginning of my life in many ways for me, where I finally became an adult and really came into who I really, really want to be and what I want to do. So that's, and it's just been better and better and better constantly.
it's amazing how all of those threads sort of came together for you, even the Kamiko, issues. But the fact that, your last assignment was the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was like a big demarcation line in the history of the world, but also
Yeah,
personally. And the fact that your hometown, or maybe not hometown, your home state at least, was having this burgeoning comics uh, creativity boom that you can sort of be a part of. Um, you must have felt that was so fortunate to how things have worked out. Again, even with the struggle of the Komiko thing, which, from my experience in these interviews, it sort of only helps to have, bumps along the way, because no one has like a smooth glide path. And I think it like
absolutely.
helps, especially in the later parts of your career when you're, overcoming this or that, to have that in the beginning.
Yeah, I credit my dad for just being an example of just keep moving forward, just keep going, just keep, he had challenges and just one of the most accomplished human beings I've ever met in my whole life. And so because of that, I knew, well, you just got to keep going. And again, with Kamiko, my very first editor was Shelley Roberg, who married Philip Bond and became Shelley Bond. And so that's why I was there at the beginning of Vertigo, because of this connection with Shelley, who ended up working at DC and with Karen Berger and creating the Vertigo imprint. And it's because of her that iZombie happened. So it's just I not for a second do I think, oh, I'm just so good that any success I've had is because of that. It's because of a lot. Luck has a lot to do with it, but also just recognizing when there's an opportunity and all of the wonderful people that are there who want you to succeed. Like Bernie, who I was talking about, would turn down jobs because they didn't feel right or something, and um, where we, his friends, would see, but you'd be so great with that, or this could lead to this, and so you just kind of want to shake him and um, man, he was just he taught me just being a good person is 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 the most important value that you can have beyond your talent as an artist or just being able to live with yourself. And Bernie, I he died not too long ago, and people who are listening, if they don't know who he is, um, it's a great mystery to me that he's not with us anymore, because he was this example of optimism for me, and just decency and kindness, and having this moral ethical center that seemed unbreakable. So I'm still in the swirl of mystery of why he's gone. But what an amazing example he was for me, and I cherish that.
So let's get into the work a bit. You mentioned Dead Air. You also had Graphic Musique in two different spellings, which were all creator owned, longer works. Was there any hesitation in your mind in terms of trying to break in with these large, very, well, I don't know about personal, but I mean, certainly your perspective kind of books rather than, I guess, continuing to look for, um, pre-existing books that you can either hop on or start at a larger company?
Well, I would think most people have heard the expression "write what you know," and um, and that's available to anybody at any time ever. Anybody has the opportunity to be inside themselves and express that through art or literature, and don't have to find permission for that. Now, um, the my best buddy in Colorado Springs was Charlie Custis, and he's the one who introduced me to Steve Siegel. Now, Charlie had the most amazing comic book collection of anybody I've ever seen to this day. And it was him that turned me onto what was happening with comics. Long story short, years before, I had cold turkey quit comics because Marvel killed Gwen Stacy. I had a mad crush on Gwen Stacy. And that was the book that I made sure I collected constantly. And it destroyed me. It literally traumatized me. I stopped buying comics and spent all my paper route money on record albums from that moment on. But meeting Charlie at the Air Force Academy, and being we were on a security detail. He became my movie buddy, and then he showed me his collection and was like, "Oh, that's great." And then I showed him that I was writing a screenplay for Dead Air. I wanted it to be a movie. I was always been a big movie fan, and I thought I'd have a really good door into selling it by completing the storyboards. And so I was illustrating my screenplay. And Charlie was, "Wow, you're a great artist. Why don't you?" And I wasn't, not then, but he was very encouraging in that way, and suggested I turn it into a comic book. And I was kind of, I don't know. And so he then gave me all these great comics, and among them was Mr. X. So he like to really, I know the exact time this was because one of the things he gave me was Watchmen, and it had two more issues to come out. So that's exactly when this was happening. So he gave me Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. He gave me loaned me his Frank Miller Daredevil comics. Year One came out. Batman Year One came out around that time. But one of the things he gave me that really knocked my socks off was Mr. X. And the first four issues were written and drawn by the Hernandez brothers. And talking with Steve Siegel, "Wow, I love this. This is fantastic." And Steve said, "Well, if you like Mr. X, you'll love Love and Rockets." Now, when I first saw Love and Rockets, it was magazine size, it was black and white, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "Trust me." And so I started reading it, and it was like the skies opened up. And because the brothers, Jaime, Beto, and Mario, could do anything they wanted. It was this and their own anthology. It was an umbrella title that anything they wanted to do with story and art was available to them. They weren't asking permission. It was pure, unhindered creativity. And so that was the inspiration for me to make my own umbrella title, and that became Graphique Musique. We were still living in Europe at the time, and in Paris there was a art supply store and a music store right next to each other. So I saw those words, Graphique Musique, and I thought, well, that's what comic books are. They're graphic music. And so being all highfalutin and snotty came up with that really ridiculous very title. Um, and then when we rejiggered it, I thought, well, I'll uh, have a phonetically spelled. That was stupid. It should have just spelled it correctly, Graphic Music, because nobody. Anyway, but that's what it was. My Graphic Music was my love and rockets, and the Hernandez brothers remain one of my biggest inspirations and influences. I love their work so much. And that stuff led me to Fantagraphics and Dan Klaus and then other indie creators who've blown me away, like Chester Brown with Yummy Fur, and just showing me there's no rules. And so that's why I took that path. And I'm glad I did, because very early on I was able to, just without anybody pulling back on the reins, just do anything I wanted. And just so my early work is very esoteric, because I wasn't filtering myself in any way. I was just it was just going right out onto the page. And then I became more disciplined as a storyteller and a writer, and of course being able to work with people like Matt Wagner and Neil Gaiman and Peter Milligan and all the wonderful writers I've worked with more recently, Matt Fraction, Dan Slott, Mark Russell. Um, I've learned so much from each of these amazing people, and again, luck again, these people I've been able to collaborate with. But it's because of the success I eventually had independently that gave me the confidence to work the way I've done when DC and Marvel did come calling. And they came calling because of the success that I was having with my own work. And because of that, there was a confidence on their part. They they didn't feel like, they had to teach me anything or show me the ropes or anything. They very much would just let me go. And that would explain why with X-Force that I did with Peter Milligan, um, I was faithful to the script. And when he, you know, wrote that Zeitgeist gets torn in half and his intestines are coming out, I drew Zeitgeist torn in half with his intestines coming out. And from there, got a call from Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, and said, got some good news, bad news. Bad news, the Comics Code Authority has rejected the book. And in that split second, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to redraw this. I wasn't even thinking about things that way. Again, I'm always just illustrating what the story requires. And I wasn't even thinking, I didn't even know that was a thing anymore. I mean, I knew the stamp, it was on the covers of, mainstream books because it just was always there. And I didn't realize there was this body that was paid to, censor or create standards for books that would be, mainstream. So this, in my mind, all of this flashed and swirled very quickly before Joe instantly went to the good news that we're not going to go with the code anymore. And so I don't have to redo anything. Nope. Everybody loves what you did. It's gonna fly as is. I'm like, yeah, all right. And then when the book came out, where the stamp would have been, it said, "Hey kids, look, no code." And soon after, and Marvel never used the code ever again. And soon after, DC stopped, and the code just went away. So that's one of my proudest moments that I helped get rid of that, or as a part of that. But not it wasn't a plan, not on my part. And but that's how it was these opportunities where I then, was getting work with Marvel and DC. And I never ever thought, oh, I'm only a Marvel artist or I'm only a DC artist. I've just gone where the stories are and the collaborations are and what lights me up. And again, just I've been very lucky and fortunate to work with the people I've worked with and been able to do what I've done.
I want to get back into X-Force and X-Statix a little later because I was actually around Marvel. I worked there for 2 years and during this time period, and it was such a interesting, weird, experimental, barrier-breaking time, I feel like, in comics and at Marvel. And so I have some questions for that, but I did want to back up. We can't sort of go past Mad Men without mentioning Mr. Frank Einstein. So the character was introduced during your, Graphique Musique and Graphic Music collections.
Well, actually,
When you,
simultaneously, Frank Einstein was introduced. I think they came out a week apart, and I can't remember which was first, but I did an anthology called Creatures of the Id, which had three stories in it. Two of them were drawn by Jeffrey or written by Jeffrey Lang. That it was his idea to have this anthology. And Bernie Moreau and I um, illustrated all three stories. The two that Jeffrey Lang had wrote, and so I penciled them all and Bernie inked them all. And then the third story was that I wrote, and that was my first Frank Einstein story. But I had also included him as a supporting character, or not a supporting character, but he was in the Graphic Music ensemble. He
mm,
was, in that group. And so they both kind of came out at the same time, but I would say technically Creatures of the Id is Frank Einstein's debut. And I drew a wraparound cover for that, and Bernie painted it, and it hangs in our dining room. Um, and then it was soon after that uh, our boys, our daughter hadn't been born yet, but our boys were becoming school age, and um, would bring their friends home and would say, "My dad draws comic books," and they would look at what I did, and we're like, they'd just kind of shake their heads and go, I don't know what this is. Um,
are you sure?
and and it occurred to me that it was very important to me that my kids liked what I was doing, and I wanted them to be excited about what I was doing. And so I tapped back into my childhood and what I got excited about. And so that is what inspired me putting a costume on Frank Einstein, who was my favorite creation at the time, and that he was the perfect vehicle for any kind of adventure story, any kind of, and because of his who he is, he's a reanimated corpse. I've always loved the Frank Einstein mythology and Frankenstein's monster and the whole existential aspects of life and death and rebirth. And he was the perfect vehicle for that. So I could take Frank on these crazy wild adventures, battling robots and monsters and aliens, or becoming friends with robots, monsters, and aliens in this super cool costume. But at the same time, have these more adult or esoteric and more mature and thoughtful, thought-provoking elements that older people would enjoy. So you've got all this colorful, thanks to Laura, colorful stuff happening. Um, but then at the same time, they're talking about things that I never stopped thinking about, and that's how Madman came to be.
I'm glad you touched on the costume and the visual because to me it is one of the most iconic, almost pop art independent, looks that's out there. I would say on par with the classic superhero costumes from, the golden and silver age. I mean, when you were coming up with that, obviously you have you know, your kids on one shoulder, you're like, I need to make, I would like to make this, something that they would enjoy and something adventurous. Um, what were you thinking? Were you thinking there's strength in simplicity? Because it is a very, as I said, iconic, simply designed costume, but that's what makes it so powerful and memorable.
Well, my favorite coming up with the exclamation bolt, combining exclamation mark with the lightning bolt. When I threw that on him, I was like, okay, this is something. And so that, but I originally was inspired by Will Eisner's The Spirit, in wanting to. So actually, all of the I kind of threw all my favorite things in a blender. Bernie Moreau's The Jam, Jack Cole's Plastic Man, Will Eisner's The Spirit, Alex Toth's The Fox, Alex Toth's Space Ghost, and on and on and on. And so I just kind of threw him in there. But because of The Spirit, I thought The Spook was a cool name. And so if you look at the original Madman costume, he looks like a skeleton, coincidentally, wearing the skeleton shirt.
Is the theme.
But that's why he has the sunken eyes, the black around the eyes, and originally had stitches in his mouth
Right.
that implied teeth. And he had three stripes on each side, which would suggest ribs. But then he had the cuffed gloves eventually, because of Will Eisner's The Spirit. And then I was at WonderCon. I'd made a fake comic book cover that said The Spook, put it in a bag and board. And early on, when we went to comic book shows, we came home with cash because we made T-shirts. And even though people didn't know what like Graphic Musique T-shirts or characters with, Graphic Music characters on shirts, and we got by selling the shirts because they looked cool. People may not know, didn't know, but we knew that we could make decent money selling shirts. And there was a local printer that would make these super high quality shirts. And we were able to make glow in the dark shirts. So I made a Spook glow in the dark t-shirt and sold them all at WonderCon. But I had him on a foam core. I had a shirt on with I cut it out of foam core, painted Frank Einstein's face on it, and then the shirt was, squeezed into the foam core shape of a torso, and that was on an easel behind us. And Greg Baisden, who was the editor-in-chief for Tundra, and this was the indie label that Kevin Eastman started
Mhm.
with all of his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle money, and met up with him. He loved it, and bang, I was off to the races with the Spook. And then I think we were going to a Dallas show or something. I just remember right before leaving, I was told we can't use the Spook. Somebody has filed an intent to use trademark, and so we have to come up with another name. And so I thought, oh, the Goon. I'll call him the Goon. And I even made a Goon logo. And which, by the way, I wrote an intro to one of Eric Powell's Goon collections, and they published my Goon logo. So, fortunately for him, I didn't go with the Goon, but
Yeah.
but I remember being on a plane. I was rereading one of my favorite books, Catcher in the Rye, and the protagonist Holden Caulfield keeps using madman as an expression, and I thought, oh, that would be great. There's no way that's available. And so when we landed, I called and can you see if we can use that? And turns out we could. And so he became Madman. And then with that, uh, I quickly started playing with costume designs because I didn't want him to look like a skeleton anymore,
Right.
because he wasn't spooky anymore. And then it was also with the second series that the first series did so well that we had this really interesting two color process with the first book because they couldn't spring for full color. And Dave McKean had done a series called Cages like that. David Mazzucchelli's Rubber Blanket was messing with two colors. And so that's why Madman, the first three issue, 48-page issues, each series looks like that. But then I always wanted, because Laura's an amazing artist, obviously, and always loved the idea of her coloring for me. And so when we were able to go with color, she became my colorist, and it was a no-brainer. And was super excited about making Madman color, and so the second series was Madman Adventures in color, and right out of the gate, you see his girlfriend Jo giving him all these different costumes and him posing in front of a mirror trying to decide what he likes best. Now, around the same time, Scott Dunbier had connected me with Alex Toth, who was a childhood hero. Again, he created Space Ghost,
Yep.
but he also did so many amazing comic books. He's become better known and appreciated over the years, but at the time, few people knew who he was, or they may have loved these, like a House of Mystery story or something, but didn't know it was Alex Toth who did it. And he also was in the EC group, did a few EC comics, and just artist, amazing, amazing creator. And with when we went with Dark Horse, because Kevin Eastman just kind of gave up on Tundra. It wasn't his jam, I guess. But this is when Bob Schreck, being at Dark Horse, said, "Well, hey, can we do it?" Pulled me in with Mike Richardson, like, yes, absolutely, we want to do it. And that is when Madman Comics started. But by being introduced to Alex Toth, um, I asked him if he would do. We were going to do a card set. We're going to do a box of cards, and all these different artists were doing their rendition of Madman, and I asked if he would do it. Now, I had sent him a letter asking him this, but when I hadn't heard back, I was also given his phone number, so I called him and asked him, and he said, "Oh, and by the way, the cards will also be eventually used for back covers, and the art will be used twice eventually, or in a pinup book." And he's like, "Oh well, I already." So when I'm talking to him on the phone, he said, "I already sent you an illustration." And I'm like, "Oh great." He says, "But you need another one for a back cover?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So he did another one for me, and we stayed in touch. And turns out there were all these there were things that you could only get in Oregon that he wanted, a certain brand of peanut, dried apricots. There was all these weird things. And he was like, "Tell you what, I'll mentor you. You you just send me every time you have a new book out, you send it to me with a box of goodies, and I'll go over the stuff with you." And that relationship was one of the most cherished things that's ever. Again, luck, luck, luck. But one thing, and I bring him up because one thing that he said with when I was still messing with his costume, he said, "The most brilliant thing about your design is it's a reverse silhouette." And reverse silhouette. And he says, "Yeah, you just don't see that." And which is funny because at the time I wasn't thinking, well, you did that. That's what Space Ghost is.
Right.
But by him not making that connection, not making that comparison at the time made me feel even more special that I'd come up with this. Um, Not at the time realizing that Alex had done it. But that's when I realized, wow, I need to really, if Alex thinks it's great, then I need to, lean in on that. And so even though I have messed with this costume, like he'll put him in a rubber suit or a space suit or this or that, his go-to is his all white suit with the red exclamation bolt.
Let's move
And
on
feel free
to.
to interrupt me
No, 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 no.
because I
It's
will
all great
just go
stuff.
on and on and on.
I know, I know. Well, yeah, maybe I should on your behalf because if you don't want to be here all night, but I'm happy to be here all night. Um, so let's move on to Marvel specifically. I wanted to know because up until that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had mostly been writing your own stuff, and you've been not a one-man team because you've been working with Laura that starting at that time. But you moved into more of the, I guess, traditional sort of collaboration for comics on X-Force, where you have a writer and editor and all that kind of thing. What was that transition like for you? Not taking direction necessarily, but you're not actually writing necessarily the book. You have a collaborator and you're working with that person and doing more of the art chores, although again, it's sort of together. So what was that transition like? Did you miss not writing?
No, I have this impossibly long outline for Madman and all the peripheral characters that I could just go off on at any time. And I will not live long enough to tell all the stories that I want to tell. But what has happened is the collaborations have become so much more important to me. I want what's in front of me right now to be the best thing I've ever done. So what I do tomorrow, I want it to be better than what I'm doing right now. And the collaborations have kept me. Um, it's just that I just feel the crackling going through me when I'm working with these other terrific storytellers. And like most recently with Mark Russell with Superman Space Age and Batman Dark Age. But early on, I got a phone call from Kurt Busiek, and he was doing Untold Tales of Spider-Man, and asked me to do a Spider-Man Untold Tales of Spider-Man annual. And so, and I'm hearing everything I want to hear. First of all, I really admire Kurt and was excited about working with him. And with this particular story, um, it was Spider-Man going on out on a date with Sue Storm before she was Sue Richards, and Namor's in it, and my all-time favorite run of comic books ever is the 100 that Jack Kirby did on Fantastic Four. Those comics just can just go through them over and over and over again, and all these amazing. I mean, Black Panther originated there. Um, the Inhumans, Warlock. It's just bum 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 bum, just and all these amazing villains, and it's just a phenomenal run. So he says, and it'll so you'll be doing Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. So I'm doing a Marvel annual, with a Spider-Man annual with the Fantastic Four. Yes, please. And then he was like, "Do you want to ink it yourself, or would you like somebody to ink?" And I just as a joke said, "I want Joe Sinnott to ink me." And Kurt's like, "Well, I think we can make that happen." Like, really? And Joe Sinnott inked me. So just an amazing thing to have happen. And then, but the biggest initially, the first big run I did was me actually calling. Usually I've done these projects with Marvel and DC because I get a phone call from an editor or somebody. But in this case, Joe Quesada and I came into the comic book biz around the same time. And so we were newbies and we'd be at shows and newbie Mike, newbie Joe. Of course, I'm in the indie world, and Joe just really took off in the mainstream world, and eventually becoming editor in chief at Marvel. So when that was announced, I called him up to congratulate him, and I had read an interview where stating what his plans were. And it's important to note, Marvel wasn't doing that great back then. They were
Yeah.
really struggling. And so it was kind of, Hail Mary to just here, let's put this guy in and see what he does. Because he did really well with his Marvel Knights imprint. So he had already kind of proven himself. And so when I'm hearing what his plans were, I was like, man, that sounds like a party. So I called him up, congratulated him, and said, looks like you're going to have this amazing party. I'd love to be a part of it in some way if you think I'd fit in somewhere. And it was like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. And again, thanks, Joe. Congratulations. And the next day I got calls from Tom Brevoort and Axel Alonso. Tom Brevoort, total hero, legendary Marvel. He's behind the scenes in some of the best stuff you've ever seen. And Axel, uh, already had a plan. So Tom called me, what would you be interested in? What would you like to do? And I was like, well, this and this and this. And so I'm just kind of calling out my favorite characters. But when Axel called, he already had a plan. He had hooked up Peter Milligan. They were going to just kind of restart all the X-Men. They had Frank Quitely and Grant Morrison with new X-Men, and they were going to reboot X-Force with all new characters. And so Axel's telling me, how would you like to create your own Marvel Mutants? And so for a minute, like, well, if I have some kind of ownership there, I'm a little worried about that. And he says, well, it's a brand new day. You'll definitely have a stake in your creations. Like, okay. But I had done a Shade the Changing Man story with Peter Milligan, was a huge fan of his back with Freakwave. He did this indie stuff with Brendan McCarthy, which still is just some of the coolest stuff that's ever been done. And I wish there would be a mainstream collection of this stuff. It's just wild. It's like Waterworld stole from that, like Mad Max on water, But just great stuff. So Axel's telling me Peter's gonna write it. You get to design and create all new Marvel Mutants and have fun. And I'm like, wow, okay, yes. And during this conversation, I was just already doodling designs. And and so by the time our phone call ended, because we were talking about all kinds of stuff and what Peter and he had been talking about, and so it was a really lengthy phone call. And early on in the call, I was like, yes, I want to do this, and be at the ground floor of something like this. And so um, I told him, well, I've already got some stuff here. I'll fax it to you, which I did. And then he called me back. These all look really cool. I said, well, they're just doodles. Of course, I'll really detail them out more than that. And he says we could use any of these except you got this floating potato that, and had a word balloon that says dupe. So I don't see that working. I'm like, again, I was just free flowing here.
Spitballing.
Yeah, I'm not married to any of these characters. And he's like, okay, cool. And so Peter, you'll be getting his first script here soon. And then he's hard at work on it right now. Then he calls me back the next day and said, okay, I'm rethinking this because I pinned up your sheet of doodles and everybody's running up and down the halls yelling, dupe. So, and Peter got excited about it too and decided to make Doop the most powerful character in the Marvel Universe. And arguably he is when you see what he's capable of, or what it's capable of. And yeah, and so we just took off from there.
Yeah, I mean, I had a whole line of questions around Doop. But yeah, you basically answered that. You had the design input. Like, how did that work? So you were already mulling over these characters and character designs, but Peter obviously is also, coming up with the story in the world. Um, how did that work in terms of the interplay between the two? Like, did he ask for certain characters? Did you say,
Yeah.
here are the characters I'm working with? Can you integrate them into the story?
Yeah, like Vivisector, for instance, was completely Peter's. He came to me like, I want this guy kind of turns into a werewolf, kind of nerdy guy. And so that kind of laid that down. I completely came up with the looks of all the characters. But he had in that first issue, a lot of those characters came directly from Peter, and then but then I had to decide what they would look like. And then I came up with Zeitgeist, the name Zeitgeist, because he wanted a team leader. And I thought, well, Zeitgeist is, and being in the Zeitgeist. And so Peter liked that for our team leader. And then because the plan was to create all these characters and then kill them all off, like they do in Deadpool 2, um, I was like, I don't know about that. I don't want to put my heart into these characters and then just have them be killed. And so I he said, okay, tell you what, I'll give you like four. we won't tell anybody, but you'll know that at least these ones will live. And so, and then that's when I came up with the orphan, Guy Smith. And the reason he was precious to me was because I wanted him to be the long lost twin brother of a character I had in the Atomics, which is a Madman spinoff. So I have Adam Baum, who looks just like Guy Smith, except Guy Smith has antennas, and so my character is Metal Man, and they were coming out at the same time originally. I was finishing up the Atomics as X Force took off. And so you would have these two characters that look just like each other, but one was in my own independent world, the other one was a Marvel character. And so I just thought that that was a sneaky fun thing to do, to have one of my creations be related to a new creation in the Marvel universe. And then Peter came up with the brilliant name, Mr. Sensitive, because my idea was to have him be so sensitive that he has to be in a special suit to tamp down his sensitivity because he feels everything. There's a celebrated battle between naked Tony Stark and a naked Guy Smith. Tony being very vulnerable without his Iron Man costume, and Guy Smith being just in raging pain from not having his Mr. Sensitive suit. And so they're throwing grass at each other and just pain, just being just a blade of grass could really hurt, Guy Smith. And Guy Smith, he's called Guy Smith because, and the orphan, because he doesn't know who his parents were. He doesn't know who his sibling is and that kind of thing. But when Peter came up with Mr. Sensitive based on his situation, his mutant aspects, I just thought that was just the coolest name ever. But that's how it worked. And then he'd say, we kind of need somebody like this, and then I would kind of throw in, well, what if he was like this, or what if she did this, and for instance, coming back with X-Statix and then the Excellent. I always thought, we had seen that Edie Sora, Yugo girl, had a daughter, and with the red hair and everything. And I always thought, that's because oh my, man, when she got killed off, and she was one of the characters that we'd agreed wouldn't be killed off. And I got talked into, it'll be powerful if this happens. And so reluctantly, I was like, "You're right. This really needs to have this real tragedy happening here," and went against my Gwen Stacy experience by her being killed. And sure enough, some people were really butthurt about it. And so from then, and then Peter and I would always talk when we decided, let's wrap it up. Let's end this and let it be its own thing and just kind of, shelf it into Marvel history, which we did. But then we would always talk about bringing it back in some way. And I thought the way we could do that is by having Edie's daughter be at the center of it. And so that's why we brought her back in the way we did. It was our way to really, in a very uncynical way, be able to bring Edie back, or Yugo girl back.
And coming off, this pretty big experience, formative, I'd say, in terms of, moving from your own creator own books to the collaboration, Marvel method, and doing all this work. How did you then choose projects? Because you went on to some, big other things at Marvel. In fact, were have part of the reason we're having this interview is you have this big art book out on Kickstarter, but you have FF, you have Silver Surfer. Did those projects just come to you? Did you seek them out based on, like, your whim and your want to sort of redefine some of the look of the characters or come up with new worlds?
Well, another happy coincidence, Matt Fraction is an Oregonian. And our mutual friend Randy Bowen would have these big karaoke parties for like New Year's and whatnot, and so we bonded over that. I hadn't realized that years earlier at HeroCon, where I think Matt is from, he met me. I was a guest there, and so he was a kid, and this was one of my first shows. And he says I was nice to him, but also spent a lot of time with him. We talked. I remember we talked about Blue Velvet, which is one of my favorite films, and I did the Chicken Walk, which Jeffrey Beaumont does, and all of these things just kind of locked into Matt's mind. But uh, he, by the way, he writes the outro to the art book and relates this story, which is why it's present in my mind. But by you know, being familiar with his work and becoming friends with him and just saying we should do something together. And so here was one of those phone calls later where he's like, okay, FF. And I'm like, all right, Fantastic Four. And he's like, but no, wait. We're gonna have our own Fantastic Four. And it was my idea. So he's like, what characters would you choose? And I've always loved Ant-Man. And so I threw him in there, and he was like, "Well, I'd love to see you do She-Hulk." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know about She-Hulk." And then he talked me into it, and then I fell in love with She-Hulk, and then came up with the anyway. It just took off from there. But and then with Silver Surfer. Oh, and by the way, Matt got pulled off because he was also doing the Fantastic Four, the actual Fantastic Four title at the same time, and then he got pulled off in other things, and so um, Tom, our editor, uh, we're gonna need another writer, and I was like, well, my older brother and I, we always were doing stuff together and talking about stuff, and he was all excited about what I was doing with FF, and I said, wait, let me talk to my brother, and Lee immediately had all these ideas about where to pick up from where Matt left off and stuff. And it was like we were little kids all over again. And the same thing with like Gerard Way, who had his Young Animals imprint, and Jamie Rich, one of my best friends, was the editor on that. And Jamie has edited more of my creator own stuff than anybody. Bob Schreck, he was Bob Schreck's assistant, and then took over for Bob when Bob went to co-create Oni Press. So anyway, it's weird how, you just kind of put all these threads together, but that's how this stuff goes down. And Gerard wanted me to do something for Young Animal, so I pitched a bunch of ideas, and then again I'm talking with Lee, and Lee. So I wanted to. Forager is one of my Bug is one of my favorite childhood characters. I mentioned that our guitar teacher had a waiting room. New Gods #9 was one of the comics that was in this stack. That the only way we could read it was at our guitar teacher's waiting room. And Lee would beg him, please, can we have this? I'll bring more comics and trade. And he was like, finally talked him into it, and we were able to bring it home. And that was so. As far as we knew, Bug was a big character, and we had just missed the other issues, not knowing that that was it, And so we just always loved Bug the Forager, and so we talked about that, and so we had about 3 or 4 proposals for Gerard, and every one of them had Bug in them. We just definitely want to do Bug, and finally, okay, cool. And Lee's idea, and this is what Gerard Way and Jamie were cool with, was Jack Kirby had left DC. Of course, he left Marvel, created the fourth world at DC, but also did all of these other things, like put Deadman in a robot body, and OMAC, never finishing OMAC's story. And anyway, there were all of these unfinished things that Jack, when he went back to Marvel, had kind of left dangling at DC. And Lee had an ending for all of them and used Bug as the through line the vehicle to pull it all together. So it is one of my absolute favorite things that I've ever done. Not just because I was able to work with Lee, but because we were able to, again, tap into our childhood the way we did on FF and tie up all of these beloved storylines that, our hero, Jack Kirby, had thrown out there. So to be able to just tie a bow on all of that this book just meant the world to us. And then with Silver Surfer, that was a phone call, and I am getting a call from Dan Slott and Tom Brevoort, and I think they pretty much said, okay, we have an idea uh, for you and Dan. Two words, Silver Surfer, and I just threw down the phone and danced around. And yeah, man. Again, I was talking about those issues that Jack Kirby did, and Silver Surfer, issue 48 for in the Galactus trilogy, 48, 49, 50. Man, I have that in every reprint. I have that over and over again. This collection, that collection, but boy, I just love Silver Surfer. I had the first issue, the 25 center, which was a big, thick issue, back in the day, believe it or not, kids. And we weren't allowed to take comics to school. So I took my beautiful John Buscema illustrated Silver Surfer #1, cut out Silver Surfer off the cover, and glued it onto my Peachy, my school book, and was able to take Silver Surfer with me to school. So that's just one example of how much that character means to me. But that is arguably the most perfect thing I've ever been a part of. I just love what Dan and I were able to do on Silver Surfer, and Tom just cheering us on all the way and encouraging and steering us, and uh, and of course Laura on colors, and I mean she'll we'll we'll be relating our experience on Silver Surfer, and Laura will tell people, when I was coloring that last issue, I couldn't stop crying. And the people we're talking, we'll be at a show and they'll be us too. It's just amazing how that moved people in the way that it did. I'm just so proud of it.
Yeah, that character in that world so fits your sensibilities, it seems. It's almost a wonder that you were not on Silver Surfer before. Like, I'm sure when you heard Silver Surfer, you're like, yes, but I can't imagine. I was like, well, that should have happened ages ago.
And reverse silhouette.
Right. There you
But
go. Exactly.
the first tease was just one of the coolest things ever. They were it said Slott Allred Rad coming soon. And if you knew, that Surfer's name is Norin Rad, you
Right.
knew what we were going to be doing. And
Yeah.
we were just getting phone calls and emails like, "Are you doing Silver Surfer?" I'm like, "Well, I can't say, but yeah, that was fun."
So I would love to go to so many other corners of your career, but we only have so much time. So I wanted to get a little bit more into the art book, again, because you're right in the middle of a record smashing campaign. How did this all come about, first of all? And did you have were you given the decision-making ability to choose which pieces went in of the, hundreds of pages and covers and things that you had done at Marvel?
Yeah, I have complete control over it. I get to decide. And I even threw in some stuff that I had ideas for, things that have had been that maybe have never been seen. Like I've done a lot of commissions. Um, uh, Simon Miller at gotsuperpowers.com keeps a list of commissions for me, and just a lot of people over the years have asked me to do Marvel things for them, and so they'll be published for the very first time. A lot of these, and a lot of them, Laura has colored, are in just black and white, so you'll see uh, kind of a more original art aspect to some of the pieces. But yeah, a lot of stuff that otherwise would not. have a spotlight on them will be in this book. And my idea for a wraparound cover became a secret reverse dust jacket. So you can choose what you want to be on the front, or you can even, because there's no text on it, you can even just pull it off the book and make a poster out of it. But and then they're making stickers out of it because I just did dozens and dozens of Marvel characters running from left to right, and there's a big uh, jigsaw puzzle of it, things like that, which for me are just really fun, and sometimes it's nice to just sit around and just be talking to people and put a jigsaw puzzle together. But yeah, just so a lot of, in fact, Simon has been wanting to get a double spread Silver Surfer from me, and it's been very detailed and specific. And he always says, when you have the time, when you have the time. Of course, I never have the time, but this was the perfect opportunity to have a reason to finish this for Simon, because we'll be able to stick it into the book. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's never been seen before. And as soon as I get that finished, we'll release it so it can help with the promotion before we run out of, there's just a couple weeks left or something. I don't know how many
Yeah,
days.
yeah, we'll put the countdown in the show notes, but as of now, I think it's probably like 12 days or something.
Okay, so yeah, I better hurry and finish this. But yeah, it's fun to have a place for this, and I don't know how secret this is, but the plan is to follow up with a Art of DC companion. So folks can look forward to that too. And I plan on doing that the same left to right, you know, just dozens and dozens of characters running from left to right. So I want to see a jigsaw puzzle of that. So if I wasn't supposed to say anything about, because right now it's about the Marvel book. So that DC thing, I was making that up. That's not true. That's just
Yeah,
that's
it's
just me
facetious.
daydreaming. So let's just so, but yeah, it's fun, man. I mean, making comic books is just so fun, and this has been a blast. I've known Chris Stevens for a while. We got this giant Nemo book that he was the editor on. So Nemo in Slumberland, but people were able to. All these different artists did their interpretations, and I did Madman in Slumberland. So, and it's a swirl. It starts with him waking up in like the same bed that Nemo's in, but the bed then turns into a giant roller skate, and the roller skate then takes him off a cliff, and he falls down, and it just all of these things swirl around on this page, and that was just a blast to do. And it's because Chris said, "Hey, what do you think?" And so that's what I did. So when he called up and asked if I'd be interested in this, again, one of those easy yeses that just, makes life fun.
I, for one, can't wait to see the finished product. I'm sure it's just going to bring back a lot of memories, and I can't wait to see the new stuff that's
Well,
in there. So,
I have I have David's book. So just as an example, here's my buddy David Max.
yeah,
So
I got that one. It's
yeah, so
super.
the flip case and um, dust jacket. So my dust jacket has the massive characters running on the flip side, and then there's all the other goodies too. I was stunned how many people wanted the head sketch. I think there's only there's got to do 150 of those things. Well, as of right now, 144. There's
Wow.
there's six more openings for the head sketch as of today, but I'm excited about doing it. I've got a
Yeah.
nice head start on it, and coincidentally was did a show in Mexico City just a few weeks ago, and they asked if people could do pre-commissions for head drawings. And so at first I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And so there are these prepaid commissions, and I did a whole slew of those and really got into it. And so I'm just in the perfect mindset to then carry on and attack these with Marvel characters.
Nice. I think you kind of answered my next and almost final question, which is, what do you got going on now and in the near future? But it sounds like a lot of head sketches.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, there's some DC stuff I'm really excited about that hasn't been officially announced yet. I love working with Mark Russell. In fact, I'm so grateful for all the people I've been able to work with over the years. I've learned so much from each of them, and it has definitely helped me with my goal to just constantly improve and progress and be a better artist tomorrow and a better storyteller tomorrow than I am today. There's another music. So I did the Bowie graphic novel
Right.
and doing another musical book with the exact same format, uh, page count and everything, different entity, which I can't say who it is yet. But I'm a third of the way done. I've hand lettered it like I did the Bowie book, and Laura has already colored a third of it. So it's a third of it is completely done, but it is a spare time project. I can't say when that will be finished, but we've got a nice big chunk of it done, and I'm really excited with it. I'm doing that with one of my besties, Professor Ben Saunders, and definitely
Mm.
want to let people know who he is. He's a professor at the University of Oregon here, but he's also the greatest curator of comic art exhibits ever. He's the curator of the traveling Marvel exhibit. If people have had a chance to see that, this is epic. Like there's like figures you could sit next to and have your picture taken with, and interactive elements in it, and of course some of the greatest comic book art ever, right there, right in front of your face. This has been going all around the world. It started at the Space Needle there, but I think that's where it started. But it's gone all around, and um, but he also here locally in the museum did a exhibit with EC Comics, the history of the superhero. He had curated Peanuts, Charles Schultz. So right there, original Peanuts artwork. He's just one of the coolest guys, and love him to pieces. And we have a raging obsession over this project. So he's writing it with me, and of course, I'm drawing it and Laura coloring it.
And we're back. Wow, that was a big one, guys. I love that Mike dressed up for Halloween, which is about when we recorded it the day before. And he has just so many stories, a lot of knowledge about comics, and I just love his perspective on everything, creativity and art, and even you saw that Star Wars stuff at the end. Just love talking to him. Hopefully, we'll get another chance to. Really didn't get around to everything I wanted to ask him about, but we did get to Doop. So that'll do it for today's episode. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. We have another episode coming up on Friday, so tune in, and we'll see you then.